Hello and welcome to the Mythgard Movie Club. Tonight we are talking about Watership Down. Now, this is for anyone who knows Corey, the Tolkien professor. You know that this is one of, or possibly his favorite.
One of top three. I think I got to say top three. Yeah.
Books, and so of course when an opportunity came to talk about the Netflix TV show that was released just last year, he pretty much, I said browbeat on Twitter, begged, cajoled, used every trick in the book. Like rabbits, he has a lot of them.
Yes.
To get us to talk about this one, so this should be a good discussion tonight. But before we get into that, let's start with a few announcements. So if you don't know yet, we've got two moots coming up, the early fall moots. First is New England Moot at the end of this month. It's hard to believe it's September already. On Sunday, September 29th. That'll be in Amherst, Massachusetts, and that should be a great time. And then we have Middle Moot on the third year. I think this is our longest running moot now, right?
Middle Moot was our first regional ever, and Tex Moot, they're both of them are on number 3 this year. Yeah.
Right. Longest running regional moot, of course. Moot is our longest running full moot. But the regional moots, so that'll be happening October 12th, an auspicious day for Kat and I, but we will not be there. And that's out in Waterloo, Iowa at Hawkeye Community College. I have to keep looking over there because that's where my screen is. It's actually where it was, because I forgot there for a second. That's the one that moves, so I have an excuse for not remembering where that one is. It's like a elvish party. It kind of moves around. And,
exactly.
Then in terms of our Signum's fall semester has started, but there's still time to get in. We have registration open until this Sunday, so you have a few more days if you haven't signed up yet, and there's some classes you want to take. You should check that out. We have our Germanic Myths and Legends class, which is a brand new one with some live lectures. You can get in on that. And of course, our C.S. Lewis Mythologies and Sex class, Modern Fantasy, taught by Dr. Olson, and then Intro to Germanic Philology and Tolkien in Context. All great classes. You can take them all if you want, or at least take one or two. Registration's open until Sunday.
All right, wanted to confirm our next two movies on the slate here. So October 10th, we're going to talk about Pan's Labyrinth, which is one of my absolute favorites ever. And then coming up in November, we have The Fifth Element, which is a movie that I think I am obligated to watch every time I bump into it on TV. So it's one of those movies that if I see 30 seconds, that's it. I'm hooked. I can't put it down. I have to see it through to the end. So for whatever that's worth, that's the kind of movie that I associate it with.
Indeed. All right, and as we usually do, we'll just go around quickly with our panelists. We're all old hats here, but just introduce ourselves. I'm Curtis Wyant. I co-host the Mythgard Movie Club and also co-host a podcast. I won't say with who because she's about to talk in a minute here, but let's go to Corey.
Great, yes. Corey Olson, Tolkien professor and president of Signum University, and huge lifelong fan of Watership Down.
And Emily?
I am Emily Strand. I am a sometimes Mythgard student. I attended my first Myth Moot this past summer, and it was absolutely fabulous. And I'm not a lifelong fan of this book. I only discovered it in adulthood with the rest of the fantasy literature that I love. So I have just been a really hardcore fan for the last several years of this book, and have even worked on, not too seriously yet, but worked on some kind of fictional adaptations of it myself. So.
I've heard some of those ideas, and I'm very excited about them to see if they come to fruition at some point. And I'm Kat Sass, the other host of the Mythgard Movie Club and Signum's academic coordinator. And Curtis and I also host the podcast Cat and Kurt's TV Review. I'm somewhere between Corey and Emily in terms of lifelong fan. I read Watership Down at around 12 years old, which I think is kind of possibly a perfect age to read this book. Here's my copy, which has very smooth pages that have been worn down over the years. And I discovered when I took it off the shelf today that it finally needed to be taped together, which I think is, while devastating, a very fitting thing to discover today in preparation for talking about this book. So that kind of gives
Is that a good portent or what?
I don't know. It's both beautiful and sad, much like this book. So that's how I feel about this story.
And maybe the show, but for different reasons.
Both beautiful and sad.
We'll get into that.
Perfect. Yes, we can talk about if it qualifies for either of those things. Yeah, well, so definitely people on Twitch and in GoToWebinar should add in some comments and questions. Arthur starts out with one, which I'm going to adapt slightly into a larger icebreaker question. He says, he first read Watership Down many years ago. He has the same copy as me. Has anybody read Shardik? And I guess the question is, as we kind of generally sometimes start with works that are coming from an adaptation of a novel, like we don't have to go into huge long stories, but what were people's histories with this book or these other adaptations or other works by Richard Adams, or what kind of expectations or hopes were you bringing to this miniseries adaptation? And that can be for anybody who wants to take the question.
I will say the only other work by Richard Adams I have read is the Tales from Watership Down, the kind of ancillary stories that he published, which were one really wonderful and gave the doves a little bit more love. No, other than that, I haven't read anything else by Richard Adams. Would love to.
I did read Shardik, but see, I don't think I can comment on it because I haven't read it in many years. And when I read it when I was in high school. In fact, I read it quite near the time when I read the Silmarillion for the first time. And I kind of hated Shardik, but I think I hated Shardik for the same reason that I didn't make it through the Silmarillion the first time, is that I really wanted more Lord of the Rings, and it was not that. And so I kind of gave up on it. But and the same thing with Shardik. Like I'm like, oh, Watership Down, except a bear. That's going to be great, right? And it was not Watership Down with a bear. Like it was different. And so therefore, not at all what I was looking for. And so I kind of, I got through it, but I did not like it. But like I said, I may think it's brilliant if I read it now. So I really need to go back and do that at some point.
I just realized I didn't actually give my history with Watership Down. I did not read it until adulthood. In fact, just a few years ago in preparation for the Mythgard Academy class. So that was when I first read it. I really enjoyed it. I've only read it the once. I have the same, though, paperback copy as Kat. But I will say I do have Shardik. It's right about there over my shoulder on my bookshelf. I've not read it, but I am vaguely familiar with the story as it is referenced by Stephen King in his Dark Tower series, in the second book particularly, which Arthur's follow-up comment here is that bears aren't nearly as cute as bunnies, which certainly in the Stephen King story, that is very much true. I did not read the actual version.
I believe it.
Yes, definitely. And as for the expectations for the miniseries, I mean, I won't say that my expectations were high exactly, but I will say I was super excited about it because there hadn't been, there was the 1978 film, and I know I was vaguely aware of, though still have not seen all of, but have watched a little bit of the animated TV series, the 3-season-long TV series there. But that's not, I mean, that's like an episodic show sort of loosely based on like the world of Watership Down. It's not, and there's some plot elements in it, but it's not like it's an adaptation of the story. It's not exactly the same kind of thing. So having not had a real full adaptation of the story since 1978, I'm like, it's time, right? I mean, it's been 40 years since an adaptation of this was done. So I was excited. I was really excited to see how they would handle that.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to throw the TV series, the cartoon kind of kids show into this slide about sources and stuff, because having read a little about it and now having watched the first 2 or 3 episodes or something I managed to squeeze in before this discussion,
Right.
already I can see at least a couple little things that I think, this is critic, I don't know, but I'm guessing that the miniseries folks seem to have borrowed a few elements that are from the shows. Certain things seem like, kind of gender swapping a couple of the rabbits seem like, well,
Yeah.
maybe they might have got there on their own without the inspiration, but there are some other more specific things that seem like a little less likely. There in the first episode, there's almost the exact same shot of the rabbits silhouetted in the dark against the moon, which is huge behind them, which is very memorable from the miniseries as well. So it seems like the people who made the Netflix BBC show are looking at all of these things as sources of inspiration. And whatever we might think of the film from the 70s, as a movie, or as an adaptation, I know there's mixed opinions on it, but I think it's a fact to say that it's a classic in its own right. A lot of people have very strong, iconic memories of that movie.
Often scarring, but yes. Yeah.
And some people with fond memories, I think.
Absolutely.
I saw Brenton Dickinson, one of our faculty on Twitter, saying today that he has strong, positive memories of both the movie and the book. So they're all kind of iconic and important in their own way.
Yeah. Hey, can I say one quick thing about this TV series there? The thing that interested me most about that, if you look at the 5 rabbits who are on that cover image there for the series, right? 3 of them are no surprise at all, right? The one on the right is Hazel. The big one who looks like an NFL linebacker in the back is Bigwig, which I quite like the fact that like they make him obviously bigger than everybody else. It was one of my handful of initial responses to the new miniseries was like, Bigwig looks like a wimp. Like he doesn't look any bigger and tougher than anybody else. Like he should look like, when you see him, you should be like, all right, well, that's a rabbit to be reckoned with right there, right? And that Bigwig with the whole like leonine mane and everything, I don't know where that comes from anatomically, but like what kind of strange alteration of the gene pool informed Bigwig's anatomy right there. But anyway, he looks tough, right? And that's cool. And Fiver, of course, is the one in the bottom left. I like the fact that Fiver and Hazel look like brothers, like they have the same markings on their faces and everything, and so that's cool. The female in the middle in the back is Blackberry, right, whom they've gender switched, which, okay, fine. But the thing that fascinated me most is of the other, so like they're only this small handful. They didn't do all of them, right? At least not in the initial like episodes. But the one in the middle there, the little rounded, adorable one, is Pipkin. So it's like Pipkin is the one. So like, okay, so you've got the 3 main ones, right? Hazel, Fiver, and Bigwig, right? That's kind of a no-brainer. Blackberry, that makes a lot of sense, right? Blackberry plays an important role, and gender switching Blackberry was, I think, a perfectly defensible adaptation choice to make. But then, so then there was one more, right? You've got those 4, and you're going to say, I'm going to choose one other of the rabbits to make one of the core rabbits, and they choose Pipkin. And I think that's a fascinating choice, right? I mean, I would have guessed maybe Dandelion, maybe Silver, right? Maybe even Buckthorn, but Pipkin? I love it. I'm not complaining. I love it. I think that Pipkin, I mean, it was one of the things, so like, as I had confessed on Twitter, I got a little carried away preparing for tonight because I not only rewatched the miniseries, which was only prudent, but then I reread the entire book and watched the 1978 adaptation again and watched the first several episodes of the TV series. So I'm ready. But the thing that really struck me in my read through the book over the last few days was Pipkin, like how important Pipkin's role is. He's so easy to overlook, but I do think he plays a really important role. So I was like, hey, you know what? Like, that's really interesting that they chose him, even if I suspect his primary role was like comic relief. But nevertheless, like, it was interesting to pick him.
Well, particularly interesting given the fact that he's not in the miniseries.
Right.
At all.
Yeah.
Neither are Silver and Buckthorn and a few of the others. So everybody below a certain tier of importance, Pipkin probably being at the highest point of that level of importance, got, just kind of excised. But, and I think we can talk about this as we get into the portrayals of the characters, it seems to me, especially rewatching it, it's more obvious the way that they took out personality elements from even the characters that were cut and kind of gave them to different characters, remixed them a little bit. Because I think you can see Bluebell being not really like Bluebell from the book. No. He's sort of a composite of Bluebell and Dandelion and Pipkin kind of together to make this new character who plays some of the functions of those other characters, but he's kind of a stand-in for a number of different figures. So it is interesting to see Pipkin being placed in such a place of prominence in one adaptation and entirely left out in another. So it's, so we can, I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts about how successful some of those swapping, choices were.
It's very cool. Like one way I would say it, in the miniseries, they did with the rabbits what I initially fully expected Peter Jackson to do with the dwarves in The Hobbit. Basically, I was surprised that Jackson ended up keeping the full cast of dwarves. I sort of expected that Thorin and company to have fewer people in order to be able to differentiate them better and have the smaller number of characters be more memorable. But obviously Peter Jackson didn't do that. So it's understandable. There are a lot of them, right? And given a compressed time frame, I don't at all criticize the conceptual choice. Not sure I liked all of the particular choices they made about what they did put into those characters, but the idea, as you say, Kat, of kind of combining things and forming, kind of composite characters in that way seems to me a perfectly sensible approach to the adaptation.
Well, and maybe the placement of Pipkin or the absence of Pipkin, really speaks to the intended audience. With this, I haven't seen this adaptation that you talked about with Pipkin there in the front, but it just from the visual, it looks like it's for much younger children. And of course, Pipkin's going to be key. My son, when we were reading it out loud, he loved Pipkin. He always wanted to hear about Pipkin and Fiver, and so it could just be the shift in focus.
Yeah, and the voice. We're getting off into the TV series now, so we should veer back to miniseries. But the voice is very clearly a child's voice, as opposed to the other actors are, kind of portrayed or played by adults and portrayed as a little more grown up. Pipkin seems to be projected as the child among all the others. So he's maybe a kind of point of view for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. He's clearly the pediatric rabbit in the picture, right? He looks almost like he's not quite a toddler, but he's all rounded and baby fattish and cute, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, like, if you tell Bigwig there that he looks cute, he's going to start beating you with that carrot. I don't know why he's carrying a carrot, but presumably to beat people.
Because they're just always hanging out eating carrots in the story.
Carrot right there. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe we can go into let's flip to some slides about some of the characters. And yeah, I kind of started out with the big three here, Hazel and Fiver and Bigwig. thoughts about portrayals of these characters. There's Bigwig trying to look tough, although yeah, he's not noticeably hugely bigger than anybody else.
Yeah. Right. So,
but I'm glad they gave him the notch in the ear, because otherwise I would never have known who they were talking about.
Well,
or like,
okay, and that's a larger question: is to what extent, you know, I mean, and that goes into the question of the animation and everything. I mean, so but we have visual characteristics and we have voices, and that's mostly what we have to distinguish these characters, other than our knowledge of the book. So, to what extent was that even? So, Curtis, you're looking like this was a chore for you.
I could not rely on that because, like I said, I mean, I read it. I mean, it's now been several years, and I remember.
You're an excellent test audience for this, Curtis.
I remember broad strokes of plots and characteristics, but not certainly. I mean, Fiverr was pretty easy to pick out in this, for the most part. And then Bigwig, once I realized he did have a notch in the ear, which was not immediately, even though the second time through I watched it, I'm like, oh, well, he says right there, you know, he hurt my ear, or whatever it is, or whatever the line is, you know, so maybe it should have been more obvious. But like, beyond that, even Hazel, like, I half the time didn't know which one Hazel was. Certainly the first time through. The second time I was a little more out of just context and what was going on. I was like, okay, I already know that like these are the characters involved, but trying to distinguish some of the rabbits was very, very difficult for me in this.
Well, it's certainly an obvious challenge that the adaptation has to overcome from the beginning, right? Because I mean, it's very difficult. You know, the rabbits kind of look alike, especially if you got a whole group of them, right? You know, so you've got this pack of like 8 rabbits all together. You know, being able to pick out, you know, one instead of the others is going to be is challenging. You know, that is. They did. And you know, one thing that I will kind of give them credit for as well, in the 1978 animated adaptation, they were much more cartoonish. Well, it's because it's a cartoon, but you know what I mean? Like, it's much more exaggerated, right? They make the differences very much more stark, so that, and in part because it's, and you know, for one reason, to list one particular example, Ephrafa, right? The Ephraphans in the 1978 adaptation all look alike, but they all look really evil. Yes, they have got all have the dark circles under their eyes, right? And they're all like that, like bluish gray color, and they all have this like squinty evil look. And I mean, it's exaggerated. It's really, they don't look like normal rabbits, right? But you can tell at a glance, like, oh yeah, look, that's an Ephraphim, right? So whereas in this adaptation, they were they didn't have massively exaggerated, you know, characteristics. They tried to make them all, you know, kind of look relatively normal. So yeah, I can easily see how that would create challenges for identifications. But yeah, as Lalite says on Twitch, you know, this is also an issue with the new Lion King movie. You know, like whenever you're like, it's just hard when you're trying to do this kind of thing with animals, and especially if you're not willing to do what does more often happen in cartoons, right? And is easier to do in a cartoon, which is just to make it look more, you can distinguish by making more comical differences, like, you know, like the leonine Bigwig in the TV series that we were just talking about, right? Yeah. If you made a real rabbit look like that, it would look ridiculous because rabbits don't have ruffs like that. But you can do it. You can get away with it on the cartoon.
Yeah.
But as for the characterizations, okay, so want to start with Fiverr? Let's start with Fiverr, because Fiverr is the start of things, right? Their decision to visualize his visions, right? Or like, no, even backing up from that, the whole relationship they established between Fiverr and going beyond, right? like as if, first of all, he was like in almost complete conscious control of that. Like he was like, I don't want to go beyond again. Okay, for you, Hazel, I'll do it, right? As if it were like, I mean, honestly, it almost reminded me of Stranger Things, like, you know, of like, you know, Elle going into the Upside Down in order to like locate people and stuff, was almost the kind of attitude that Fiverr seemed to have towards like this other place where he perceives his visions. And then he had his dreams, which seemed to be not exactly the same thing as the visions, because the dreams kind of came to him, but he had to interpret them, right? I mean, it wasn't, he just, and he didn't know. And there's the one scene which I found utterly bizarre the first time I saw it, and I found it a little bit less bizarre because I was expecting it, when Fiverr misinterprets the dream, right? He's had the picture in his dream of a rabbit himself, as it turns out, riding in the hoodoo, right? So they're going and they're trying to figure out some way to help Bigwig, and he sees a red hoodoo just like the one in his dream, and he's like, ah, this is it. This is really significant. Let's like go down and like play in traffic because this is what is supposed to happen, right? And then like he almost gets killed playing in traffic, and the result, nothing happens, and everyone's like, okay, yeah, Fiverr's totally crazy. Let's not pay attention to Fiverr anymore. And I'm like, what did we accomplish there? I was so confused the first time. The second time, I didn't like it any better, but I was a little bit less confused because the thing I was taking for granted, the thing that didn't register fully the first time I saw it, is the more tenuous relationship that Fiverr had with his visions, right? He had to interpret them, and he didn't know how to interpret them. So he kept saying with that vision he was having with the ropes and the car, right? That was his like central dream that he kept having, and he had no idea what it meant until like the very end when he's like, oh yeah, I'm having all these dreams about like lots and lots and lots of ropes, because it means you're supposed to go like bite the rope and let the dog loose, apparently. Like that's the point of that dream. And P.S. I'm going to be driven home in a car, I guess. Like that's, but even though he never really interpreted that until after the fact. So it was thinking like really big picture. That was to me a fascinating element, and of not just of Fiverr's characterization. Because of course in the book the whole drama is like, are they gonna believe Fiverr, right? That's not the question. Never like, is Fiverr right, or does Fiverr know what he's talking about? The question is only, are you gonna listen to Fiverr, or are you not gonna listen to Fiverr, right? And you know, I'm thinking of that you know, that sentence after they leave the Warren of the Snares, when it's like, you know, there was no more, you know, there was no more questioning of Bigwig's strength, of Hazel's leadership, or of Fiverr's insight, right? Those three things are now like the three foundations of their new Warren, and no one in what, you know, from in the Watership Down Warren is ever going to question those three things again. So having Fiverr in this really uncertain state really messed me up the first time, but it seems to be part of the bigger picture, right? This whole film really kind of calls into question the whole like sort of fantasy supernatural element of the entire story, right? We got the story of El Herrera at the beginning, which was strangely done and strangely altered, I felt. But then we never got El Herrera again. El Herrera is like Sir not appearing in this miniseries after that, right? And it's the Black Rabbit's Ausla, which like from a book context is seriously creepy that Hazel is invited to join the Black Rabbit's Ausla at the end. And I'm like, oh, does he get to be one of the gibbering spirits that like floats around the stone burrows? Wow, what a promotion. That's amazing. But yeah, I mean, obviously it's fine. Yeah,
I definitely want to get into the kind of larger like mythology and world building stuff. But like as it pertains to Fiverr specifically, it seems like, is it overstating it to say that I think both Fiverr and Hazel have less confidence in their own, I don't know what, intuitions or abilities than it seems. I don't know if it's exactly the same because I haven't really thought about it, but it reminds me of conversations that we've all had about the changes with Aragorn in the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films, where, you know, the arc of the character's the same, ultimately the decisions are the same, but and maybe less so with this. Some of the decisions definitely aren't the same here, but it seems like they've added a layer for those two at least of questioning and even faultiness to their decision making.
Yes.
Of like Hazel shows less confidence in Fiverr. Hazel struggles sometimes more with his own I don't know, his own gut instinct, and Fiverr's, visions don't always turn out to be interpreted correctly by him, let alone anybody else. So that seems like a consistent kind of, I don't know, undermining of the, well, I don't want to assign any motivation for what it's trying to do. Just that seems to be a change, at least with those two main characters to the story.
Definitely. Like nobody knows what they're doing in this. I mean, like the characters, none of them, Fiverr is not confident in his visions. Hazel is not confident in his leadership, and Bigwig is not confident in like Hazel's leadership or anything until the very, very end, right?
No.
So everything just seems to kind of happen.
Well, and I have a question for folks, because I think I remember Emily saying, so I'm setting you up. I'm sorry, Emily, you're going to be
that's fine.
my straw person for this thing. But I remember I definitely want to ask about some of these voice performances too, because I'm okay with a criticism. I'm okay with a lack of confidence. There's definitely that with Bigwig in the beginning with Hazel. And there's this moment in the miniseries where he says, "Well done, Hazel Raw," and it's sort of that turning point when he finally, after the Warren of the Snares, like Corey said, there's no more questioning, and Bigwig stops for the most part, undermining Hazel's authority. But I maybe, in addition to some of the writing choices, I struggled, I think, in particular with John Boyega's Bigwig, who I just found very one note through the whole thing. Like, I'm waiting for a little more, I'm waiting for there to be a bit of an ebb and a flow of, as we get to know him, like, yes, he's a bit abrasive. He's a bit of, a bull in a china shop, but like, you kind of learn to love him kind of guy. And I didn't entirely feel that. I kind of felt like we were kind of hitting the same joke over and over again, which is, yes, he's loud, he's aggressive, he's impetuous, and he's never going to be anything else. So it might be a bit of a combination of both vocal performance and poor writing choices. I'm not quite sure, but I wasn't crazy about some of the way that the characters were portrayed, and at least some of these main characters.
Yeah, I think I liked John Boyega less as the series went on, until, that line I was like waiting for, the Silfle Hraka Uamblia Ra. I mean, that was just like so kind of anticlimactic. I was just like, big deal. Whereas in the book, you're like jumping up and down and fist pumping in the air, and it just kind of fell flat to me. And I think that was kind of emblematic of like, wait, am I the only one who does that? It was kind of emblematic of how, it just kind of fizzled out a little bit over the course of the series. But, I think this is kind of an overarching comment. I think the complexification of everything, from the characters having kind of a longer way to go in terms of their own journeys than what we saw in the book. And at the same time, some of the dialogue seemed kind of more aimed a little lower than the dialogue that we see in the book. It's less subtle. There's less subtle characterization. You get more things spelled out to you kind of in an aggressive way in this series. Like when Bigwig says at the very beginning, it'll be a fine day when I call you Hazel Raw or whatever. It's like, it's just like a little too much. It's like, is he really right? He becomes like less likable. And so we have two things going on. We have that kind of complexification where everything is kind of more complicated than it is in the book, but at the same time you have the dialogue and the characterization being slung a little lower. And that, to me, that was a bad, not a very successful combination of, for the adaptation. Those two things together. Like, again, it seems like it's aimed more at an adult action fantasy audience. But I think the real genius in the book is that fact, like you said, Kat, that the age 12 is just about the best age, you could I mean, I read it to my son when he was 6 and he got so much out of it. I mean, he loved, I mean, he was, fist pumping in the air because he knew all those rabbit words, at the end when Bigwig makes his line, so it was not, I've taught him well. Yeah, so I think that's kind of an overarching observation I had about the whole thing. But I'm also kind of not the most film friendly person in the world. I mean, I don't know, maybe a lot of us are just kind of biased toward books, but
sure, and we're
it.
biased towards books that we're particularly attached to. So the trick is trying to be open-minded to, as I was, not be irritated with every change just because it's a change,
right.
but to try to see, like, I don't know, as like, I feel like that's one of Corey's soapboxes through all of your like long explorations of these adaptations and stuff, is to like, okay, but what else are they doing,
Right.
Yes.
And that's, I think that's tough, is when, all right, change isn't necessarily a bad thing, but hopefully you're bringing to it the same kind of subtlety and complexity as was in the original. And I still wonder, like, to what, I feel like this does tie in back to that question of the animation. To what extent is the writing and the voice work overcompensating for a limitation in the animation? And I want to point out that like just yesterday, the latest episode of the Imaginary Worlds podcast dropped, and it's about animation. And it's like this whole change from 2D hand-drawn animation to what looks increasingly like the future, which is CGI, and now this like very hyper realistic, kind of Lion King CGI, where they're calling it real, live action when it's not. Thanks, Arthur Harrow, for reminding me to listen to this today. And the most important thing I think they talked about is that some of these differences that are inherent in CGI, the fact that this is apparently true, I wouldn't have known this, that when they do these CGI, films, you might be assigned to work on a specific scene. And so you're going to work on all the characters and all the details for that scene, and then you're going to go on to a different scene. Whereas in hand-drawn, it's traditional for different animators to animate separate characters. So an animator can look at Cinderella and identify the animator based on the character, because the evil cat in Cinderella has the characteristics of, almost like an actor does, of the animator behind that character. And you can see some people are great at villains. So the same guy that does Shere Khan also does, I don't know what else, a different villain in a different Disney movie. And you can see that from movie to movie. And so they're carrying a lot of those quirks and personality things along with them. And that is just apparently inherently lost to a great extent, if not totally, with CGI, where you're not starting over from scratch with every drawing by hand. You're dealing with modeled forms that are saved in the computer, and they can be passed from person to person. And that's not even getting into the limitations of the animation in terms of, can they make the right facial expressions, and maybe a bit of cartooniness, even though it takes away from the realism, adds a personality and a humanity to it, that when you're trying to go for, Planet Earth, the musical, it doesn't necessarily translate in the same way. So yeah, I wonder if lack of subtlety is a result of the writing and the acting trying to inject a kind of human personality into some of these creatures that aren't necessarily designed to have the appearance of that human personality.
Yeah. One thing that I was noticing, thinking about Bigwig and the way that he's depicted in the animation here. So I often forget when I'm watching an adaptation of a book. This was a problem for me on several occasions with the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings, right? My problem is it's really easy for me to forget that filmmakers care at least as much about earlier films than as they care about the book, right?
Mm.
You know, when I'm thinking about the adaptation choices that are being made and the relationship between this story and the earlier story, I'm thinking almost exclusively of the book, right? When I keep forgetting the fact that, like, the Bakshi Lord of the Rings film was almost as important to Peter Jackson as the books in some sense, right? I mean, that's a major, and so of course we have the scenes in the Fellowship of the Ring, for instance, which are very, very closely linked to the Bakshi adaptation and stuff like that. And if you forget about that, you can lose sight of, there are choices that are being made, which in a sense really don't have anything to do with the book at all, right? They have to do with the previous film. Bigwig, not only Bigwig's physical representation, but his character as well. A lot of that one note that you're complaining about, very rightly, and I agree with you, that's almost directly out of the 1978 film. I hadn't watched that since we did the class, the Mythgard Academy. It's been years since I watched the 78 film. I watched that again, and I was really, first of all, I'd forgotten about the visuals of that. So when I was watching the miniseries and Bigwig came out for the first time, and he's got this like little black toupee on in the middle of his forehead, right? And I'm like, okay, that's not how I ever pictured like the knot of hair that Bigwig has on his head, right? Like, why is it black, and why does it sort of look like a bad toupee? And the answer is because that's exactly what it looks like in the 78 animated film. Bigwig is gray. He's that color. He's got a black thing on the top, like mohawk on the top of his head, which looks almost exactly like that. So, and Kat, the line that you quoted from him about like how he would never call and that day, the day that I call you Hazel Robb will never come, right? That was a direct quote. They lifted that line from the 78 film. It's not in the book, right? But again, so I think that Bigwig's characterization, both his physical characterization, his representation in the animation, and his characterization owe a great deal more to the 78 film than they owe to the book, actually. And I'm not saying they didn't read the book. I'm not saying they didn't go back and think about that at all. But I definitely, with Bigwig in particular, I found that influence unexpectedly really striking when I went back and watched the 78 film at the end of having watched this miniseries again.
Luke S. in the comments here suggests that the tuft of hair is Bigwig's big wig, in fact.
Yeah, it's much more literally what it looks like, right? It's almost like, they're like, well, if it were a human character, we'd have to make a wig that he would have to wear, right? So let's put a bit of hair on a rabbit that looks like a wig, and then it will be, that'll work.
Deborah Allen brings up a point too, which is something that I thought of while watching as well. Is that one of the things that I remember from the Mythgard Academy class, Corey, is you sort of stressing these are rabbits, not humans, and I was not at all convinced that they weren't humans in this mini-series part of the time.
Absolutely.
If you want to flip ahead, I think slide number 12, I definitely wanted to talk about the kind of increased anthropomorphization of these. So yeah, Richard Adams says,
"You lack animality."
Yes. Which I thought was an appropriate quote. He said, in making up the anthropomorphic story, I followed the idea of Rudyard Kipling in his two Jungle Books. That is to say, although my rabbits could think and talk, I never made them do anything physical that real rabbits could not do, which at first glance, I think this film largely appears to hold to this, but kind of not really at all, because we get references to kissing, smiling, laughing, singing,
dancing.
dancing, walking on hind legs. You know, so it's a funny kind of no man's land that they landed in, where
Yes.
by all appearances they appear to be more realistic, maybe even than the 70s animated film, but kind of not really. Like once they start, and a lot of this is in the dialogue, like references to things that they shouldn't know about or shouldn't want to have anything to do with.
Yes. Yeah. No, this was one of the things that struck me most forcibly on my second watch of the miniseries. And the place that I noticed it is, it's almost like the other half of that picture, Kat. I agree with you. We see them doing things which rabbits don't do. But what struck me even more is what we don't see them do. Like, Richard Adams does a really wonderful job from the very beginning, like from the first couple chapters, of really trying to immerse us into the world of rabbits, right? Think about the series in the woods at the beginning when they first leave the Sandalford Warren, right? And they go through the woods that night and they're all terrified, right? Nothing has exactly happened to make them terrified. I mean, they meet the badger later on, and and that's a sort of a scary moment, but they're already terrified before that happens, right? What makes them terrified? What makes them terrified is just being in a wood at night and far from their holes, right? With nowhere to bolt to if something comes in. And so like the way in which Adams gets us into the mindset, thinking like a rabbit, right? Like just being somewhere where you know there is no hole that you can possibly bolt to. The way that he describes the movement of the underbrush and the trees moving above them, all these strange sounds and sights, which are always making them jumpy. But that combined with the knowledge that there's nowhere to flee to, and the way that they're like, and Pipkin and Fiver are like, they've gone like a quarter of a mile and they're completely exhausted just through full nervous exhaustion, right? It's such a wonderful introduction to like how rabbits think and what the emotional life of rabbits is like. The film aggressively, it seemed to me, never invited us to enter into the rabbit world at all. Instead, it brought the rabbits into the rabbits think like people. It's not just that they act like people, they think like people. They don't think like rabbits, and they never ask us to think like rabbits. Now, I'm not saying that is necessarily bad. Like you can pull that off, like doing anthropomorphic animals, like fully anthropomorphic animals. That's fine. There's a robust tradition behind that, right? You can tell a perfectly good story that way. Wind in the Willows is a perfectly good story, right? Even though you don't really get into like inside the mindset of real moles, right? Through Wind in the Willows, it's okay, but it's very, very different, and it introduced some very significant differences, I thought, to the series. Especially, I don't know. I was very. So, Kat, as you were talking about like my, adaptation doctrines, and I was trying really hard. With Watership Down, it's hard, right? Lord of the Rings adaptations, Watership Down adaptations, the hardest for me to stay objective about, right? And it's inevitable. When I'm watching it for the first time, I can't help being like, oh, no, they changed that. Oh, no, that's not right. Oh my God, you just like, you can't help it. Like it's there, right? So the second time through, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to judge. Right, it's fine. I now know what they changed. I know how it's different. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to open myself up to what this story is trying to do, right? So I can try to evaluate it on its own ground. My biggest problem was I couldn't figure out what that was, So like this change, for instance, this lack of animality, I didn't feel confident about where I was being taken instead. What I was being given instead of that. It was much stranger in that way. And I had less of an idea of kind of as an audience person where I was sort of supposed to be, what I was supposed to be receiving. I don't know. I mean, maybe if I carry on watching it more times, I'll be able to see it more clearly, but I was really struggling with that. It felt really, like they were, because they still kept kind of going through the motions of, Kat, as you say, even just with the animation, right? I mean, honestly, I think I might have been even more comfortable with it had they like worn clothes. Like seriously, let's go let's go Peter Rabbit with this, right?
It would have been less creepy to watch them talk.
Yeah,
I just found it really creepy to watch them talk. There's just something about the realism of it combined with what they were trying to do, and then despite ironically to the fact that they are more anthropomorphized, there's also in the storyline much more of this emphasis on the destruction of humans, the destructive nature of humans, and the cruel destructive nature of humans. And so it's like the whole thing, I mean, this is kind of a metaphor, I guess, but it's like the whole thing stunk of humans, like whereas Adam's book stinks of rabbit, and when you get the human whiff, it's like, ooh, what's that,
Right.
But you're so immersed in this rabbit world that everything stinks of rabbits, and this film just stunk of humans.
No, that's an interesting thought. I didn't really think about it when I was watching it, but I think you're right that like when the rabbits interact with humans, it's the rabbits who are intruding in the show almost more than the other way around, which I hadn't really picked up on until I said that. But
yeah, it's true. Yeah, Curtis, think about that scene. The fact that Hazel has to go through the living room of the farmer in order to get to where the hutch rabbits are on like the back porch there. But even, I mean, apart from the fact that it makes it a little weird and weirdly extreme, but Curtis, just thinking exactly what you were saying, like the fact that we found ourselves in a human living room was weird. Like it felt weird, like we were closer to humans, and I don't know, it just seemed much more at home in that human world, much more fully immersed in that human world.
But then it makes bizarre choices. Like sometimes when I think, all right, maybe I can see what it's going for, it goes and doesn't do the thing, I think, because to me, if you want to immerse in that human world, the obvious place to do that is with the whole Deus Ex Machina chapter at the end, which is what Adams does. Like, you're worried about Hazel, you don't know what's happening, it's in the climax, it's terrifying, and then all of a sudden we get a chapter that is from the little girl's point of view.
Yes.
And you have to infer that she's caught this rabbit, and you quickly or slowly catch on to the fact that it's Hazel. But it's not even Hazel's impression of the human point of view. It's suddenly we're for the one chapter, we're taken out and we're given the human point of view, and you're left to imagine what on earth Hazel makes of all this, and can he even understand what's happening to him? And then he gets dropped off, and then in the next chapter, he's reunited, and it's like, guys, I can't even describe to you what happens. Like he just got taken up in a spaceship to the alien planet.
I can't even.
And then they don't even do that. So if you want to immerse us in like the human world, it seems like maybe you want to show how Fiverr gets rescued. No, we just cut to he's caught by the cat, climax, car drives by, drops him on the street, drives away. That's it.
And it undermines the thesis they've been going for, which is that humans are so destructive, because then Fiverr's like, see, the little girl helped me after all. See, humans are okay. And it's like,
this is the one place where you should be totally immersing us in. Yeah. This is the big counter to the anti-human argument is, but there's this little girl, and there's a vet, and they're gonna help him out, but that's so it seems like when you think you catch on to where this miniseries is, maybe there doesn't seem to be a lot of consistency to the places where they choose to deviate. Let's say that. If we agree that deviation isn't necessarily a sin, I can't always figure out why they deviated in the ways and the places that they chose to do that.
Yeah, this other image that you've got here, the chanting praise to Frith in Cowslip's Warren, is another classic example, right? It's like, okay, so we're and again, it fits in exactly here too.
Instead of
right, exactly. It's got to be weird right? So we make it like weird in a sort of bizarre religious cult kind of way to make it feel weird to the audience. Whereas, of course, it feels weird in the book because we've been so immersed in the rabbit point of view that, you know, Hazel and are like representative art. What? Like, what? Are you insane? There must be something wrong with you. I can't understand this at all, right? And it's I mean, it's one of those places, because there are a few places like that, right, where the rabbits encounter something that we understand perfectly well, and we're just like, but yet Adams is very aggressive about inviting us to sympathize with the complete puzzlement and, like, you know, total like obliviousness of the rabbits without losing respect for them, right? Like, you don't think in the book, at least I mean, I don't see any impulse to feel like Hazel's a moron, right, for not getting the shape, right? We don't think less of Hazel when he doesn't understand the shape. Instead, we enter in with him to this like eerie otherness of this strange warren where they push rocks in the wall and make shapes, right? So it's like, okay, so in the film, they're like, okay, there's something weird here, right, in this well. And it needs to be kind of creepy and make these rabbits look strange and very different. So we have crystals which they sort of worship, right? I don't understand. Like, I don't see how that fits in with Cowslip's Warren and with the whole spirit of Cowslip's Warren. In fact, it seems explicitly opposite, not just to how Cowslip's Warren was in the book, but even how they were depicting it in the rest of the show, like elsewhere, right? So like in one part of the Warren, they're like, oh yes, like ours is just to go along with whatever happens. But then they show on the other part of the Warren, them being like,
right,
praying for us, right? Yeah, they're praying,
right.
and they pray. I mean, you captured this one line: "Devoted are we to the path he decides," but that's not all they say to the crystal. You know, like they no, it's not what they say in the chant. It's what Strawberry says when she's introducing it. She says, "This is a place where you come when you're really sad and you need to be lifted out of that." And I'm like, lifted out of that? We do that here in Cowslip's Warren? Like, that's a thing? I don't understand. Like, they don't seem, it didn't, different was okay, but it didn't seem to be pointing anywhere. I didn't get Cowslip's Warren in the film version of Cowslip's Warren. Like, I didn't get what was it meant to be doing to the rabbits? What were we meant to be to see about how they had changed? It just did not seem a coherent story, and certainly not, you know, sort of rabbit-like. Certainly.
Well, and it's bizarre in that we're kind of pointing out all these ways in which they've made them more human. And here's one example of rabbits behaving inappropriately like humans, and they've changed it. So it's like, guys, I'm not entirely sure that the writers are clear on the point of some of these episodes, you know, or what's the, the one thing I'll give it is that I reread a blog post I wrote complaining about the 70s movie after we watched it for Academy. And my main complaint, besides that I don't really like the animation in it, is that it seemed like it didn't have any sense of the importance of the adventures. Like, it just kind of checked a box. All right, we did that. All right, on to the next thing. And it just kind of bopped along, and you didn't get a sense of why these things were significant.
Yes.
What I'll give the miniseries is that the miniseries seems to understand that there is significance, but I don't believe that they necessarily know what the significance is. So I'm getting a sense of import, something, or like the characters. This is significant. Like, I get that there's much more kind of, I don't know, a sense of grandiosity or something from the various episodes of what happens, but I feel like coming out of it, like I would really just like to talk to them about why.
What's happening here? Yeah.
What's happening? Why is it important? How does that relate to our main characters? And what should they be taking away from this? Or what should the audience be taking away from this?
Well,
Absolutely.
and I think the stuff with the crystal, again, and the changes that they made to the creation myth and to the figure of El Herrera and the figure of the Black Rabbit also sort of speak to that fumbling around in the dark with regard to the symbolism that's really at the core of the story. And I was so glad that to see some of those quotes from Stanley Hauerwas, because, you know, I mean, this idea that these myths that hold us are so important in our everyday life, you know, and how myth can sustain, you know, a people, you know, through real turmoil.
If you want to go to the next slide, Curtis, we can maybe talk about that, the like the mythology and stuff. Yeah. I mean, I have to admit, I kind of like the opening creation myth scene just because visually I found it very striking and it's beautiful in a way that I'm not sure the rest of the animation is.
And it's straight out of the 1978 cartoon adaptation.
It really is. It really is.
I thought there was maybe some similarities to the Tale of the Three Brothers from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. That's what I saw.
Visually. Yeah.
But I haven't seen the 78 movie, so
I wasn't thinking of that.
I was warned away from it by its
and it's right. So the 78 movie, when it does, it only does it once or twice, but whenever it does El Herrera myths, it's done in a kind of folk art sort of way. This is more like shadow puppet kind of, but similar, like this kind of almost folk art cave drawing kind of something kind of primitive about it.
I liked it, but I like the opening with this. I kind of like the art. I'm fine with that. In fact, the more I think about it, the more I like it, because you're right about the shadow art, right? Like it's like a magic lantern kind of effect that they seem to be going for here, and I like that. What I like about it is that seems to me symbolically kind of appropriate, right? Like shadows projected from the past, and it's kind of unclear in places and everything, and it's not designed to be good animation, right? It's just a figure designed to recall the stories and things. And anyway, so there's a lot that I liked about that. But I had my first serious misgiving in the first story, the story of El Herrera that's told at the beginning. And my first serious misgiving came at the moment of the blessing of his bottom. And in particular, the context in which that happened, right? He's standing there looking up at Lord Frith, having a face-to-face conversation with Lord Frith. And Lord Frith says, I have a blessing for you too, El Herrera. And El Herrera just like, it's like really rude. He just turns around and he's like, yeah, well, bless my bottom. And I'm like,
it's like,
dude,
it's like a big middle finger.
Yes, exactly. It's like he just flipped Frith the bird, and Frith being like, a little bit, you know, I don't know, kind of like browbeaten or something, is like, okay, that was super rude, but I guess I'll give you the blessing anyway. I mean, like the fact that he blessed him anyway, I'm like, seriously, like there's some smiting would be going on if I were telling the story at that time.
It's humorless.
It is humorless, and it completely like the context of that line, the context of the bless my bottom line in the story is totally, it's endearing, right? He's trying to hide, right? And his bottom is sticking out of the hole that he's digging, and he doesn't want to stop digging because so he's hiding his face from Frith. He's ashamed, he's afraid. It's actually like, well, I was about to say cheeky, which is of course a poor choice of word under the circumstances, but it's cheeky. It's cheeky, but it's also it's also kind of humble in its way, right? You know, because again, he's hiding his face, but it's just like it seemed like a really tin ear, like they didn't get, because like this. The wild, it felt like they were not even aware of the fact that the way they were telling the story just made it wildly inappropriate, right? And again, one of those things, like they made a change, but they don't seem to be in control of where the change is going, right? And that was my first misgiving about the miniseries.
Yeah, I was right there with you. I was like, wait, now what now? You know, and
yeah,
it didn't bode well.
No, Not at all. And that now, did they? I think they did. Didn't they do that line? The big line that, the all the world will be your enemy, prince with 1,000 enemies, and whenever they catch you, they will kill you. Right? Be cunning and full of tricks, and your people shall never be destroyed. I know they do it in the 1978 one. I'm forgetting now whether
they do that in full, and I think that softened the blow, as I was so pleased to have that kind of full speech at the end that it was sort of such a relief. I wasn't even, it kind of, some of the earlier little cuts passed me by.
Right.
So yes, they do kind of finish with that big speech. I mean, I think the even bigger issue in the long run is the fact that we get this whole hero myth at the beginning, and then don't have any more El Herrera in the story. I mean, there's a few references to him in the dialogue here and there, but we don't get any more as a story, right?
Yeah.
But no more stories of him. We don't get any other recounted stories of him.
No.
And
no.
when there's an intrusion of the kind of supernatural, it's the Black Rabbit of Inlay.
Yeah.
Which, again, seems like I just can't figure out why.
Yeah. Well, and here's what to me was even worse, Kat. Not only does El Herrera not come back, be cunning and full of tricks. Nobody plays a trick at any point. Like, there's no tricks. And I mean, that's the whole point. Like, rabbits will always need tricks, right? I mean, this is that, and the entire context of the Efrafin raid, right? How, like, we're going to play this trick that, like, El Herrera's Ausla would be proud of, and, like, this is going to be the greatest thing ever. Nobody does a trick. There's no tricks. Nobody tricks anybody at any time in the entire film. Like, there's some brave things that are done. There are more rash things that are done, but, like, be cunning and full of tricks, and there's no priority anywhere in the plot line. Like, it never occurred to them to actually make anyone cunning or perform any tricks at any point. And again, it's just another one of those things which they changed, but I don't see what they're replacing it with. And if they, I mean, I agree, Kat. Had they not said that line at the beginning, at the end of this first story, I'd have been seriously alarmed, right? But it was almost worse to say it and then have absolutely zero follow through on, like, this is the story that's going to set the tone of the entire world, except we're not going to follow it in any way through the entire series. And that was hard. It was hard.
Can we take a moment for the boat scene? Can we just take a moment of silence?
Yes.
Yeah.
Ed Powell said on Facebook, I guess indicating that he would not be joining us for this discussion, said that they didn't include the boat scene. They're dead to me. So
they're dead to him. Yeah.
That's kind of the significance of the boat scene in a nutshell.
Can't say more than that.
Yeah, fair enough. I was so stunned. There was nothing that surprised me more in my first view through than, like, I kept at first, I mean, I was holding on to, like, wild, desperate shreds of hope, right? Like, okay, maybe they've just changed things around. Maybe in a minute there's going to be a chase scene which is going to end up at the river or something, right? Surely they're not just going to, like, lollop their way back and appear at Watership Down. That can't really be what's about to happen, right? And they're just playing the boat scene close to the vest still, right? Holy cow. But again, that's Emily, that's like the biggest example of this whole, like, non-trick issue, right?
Yeah.
Oh my.
It's the trick of tricks.
Yeah.
If we can go back up to the characters, so the one maybe after the main three, I have a slide kind of on the other Sandalford characters, because I want a minute for the next one. I want a minute for I need to rant about Dandelion for a minute, because in my lifetime, I will have an adaptation of Watership Down. Yes. On my bucket list is to have an adaptation of Watership Down that does justice to Dandelion, because it doesn't exist. And Emily, I'm counting on you.
That's it.
Because apparently nobody else feels the way I feel about this.
Well,
Because I think it
duly noted.
this relates to this misunderstanding of some of the mythological elements and the significance of these things. I might have been irritated with some of the swapping of the characters. I can make peace with some of it. Some of it frustrated me more than others, but Dandelion's my favorite. And one of the things that irritates me is that inevitably all of these adaptations end up breaking apart the two main pieces of his character, the running and the storytelling, and they kind of act as though they're not related to each other. And I feel like they are. I feel like in that first kind of speech from El Herrera, this is the main survival tactics of rabbits, right?
Yes.
Is storytelling, and kind of this oral tradition of their folk hero and their traditions and their tales, and this whole idea of first they have to catch you. And these two elements to me are kind of inextricable in the way that they're combined in this one character. And it just bugs the heck out of me that every time we do one of these, somebody else is the storyteller, or somebody else is fast, or they have Dandelion be fast here, and then they don't have him involved in the dog chase in the end, which makes zero sense, because why?
Right, Blackavar instead?
Why is Hazel running? Hazel.
Why did we? Yeah, why did we just get exactly? Let's get the rabbit with the limp and put him in charge. Yeah, absolutely.
So we had to artificially injure Dandelion so that we could have Hazel, who's also injured, run in his place. And I just feel insulted by this line about how Dandelion speaks once a fortnight. I took that very personally. So anyway, I just wanted him to say my piece.
No, Kat, I agree with you, and especially as another example of how it's felt in so many places, like the miniseries itself, like just did not really know what it was doing, right? I mean, when I first saw it, and we had that weird moment with the crows, where I was like, okay, we're kind of taking the crow scene and the attack of the rats, and we're kind of combining them. I'm like, all right, okay, I can roll with this. And Curtis, that was the one of the first big moments where I couldn't tell the rabbits apart either. When Dandelion says, okay, I will lead them off. I totally thought that was Hazel at first, like doing the leadership thing and running the risk and leading them off. And then it's Dandelion, and I'm like, wait, what? Dandelion is doing that? And then, of course, Kat, then it comes back and somebody, well, I think it's Hawkbit, right, delivers the line, that's one fast rabbit, right, as they're watching Dandelion run around the crows. And I'm like, okay, so I'm willing to accept that we're giving Dandelion this like heroic role in this randomly changed scene, assuming that's going to set up, and because Kat, I was absolutely assuming we were setting up the dog scene at the end, right? Yeah, exactly. I'm like, okay, maybe this will be well bought, at the price of payoff with the dog scene later on, and then nothing. In fact, not even a single further reference to his speed or utilization of that as a plot element at any point anywhere else later on in the season.
Except for when he saves Fiver from the car, which we weren't sure why Fiver was running around under the car.
When Fiver was playing in traffic. Yeah. Okay.
Which, again, is just kind of a closed circle. It doesn't advance the plot at all. It just it's just a weird diversion for Fiver to, kind of tease this whole mystery of his visions.
Yes. Yes.
Well, yeah. Again, it's like I could be okay with some of the recombinations of things, but I'm not entirely sure to what end, to what purpose. On a positive note, I will say I enjoyed Daniel Kaluuya's Bluebell, who Curtis and I for our podcast watched a show called The Fades, which was this one like short-lived 6-episode weird supernatural show on British TV, and Daniel Kaluuya is kind of just doing his the Fades character as a rabbit, and
Okay.
it was enjoyable enough to me. Like, even though it didn't really necessarily relate to Bluebell from the book, because he's not really funny in the way that Bluebell's funny. But
Right.
just as a performance, I enjoyed some of the stuff that they did with him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it was the only line in the whole miniseries that I actually laughed at, that actually made me laugh, when he says to Blackberry, "Now we're inseparable," right? That was funny. Like I like that. But and I didn't. It was a kind of a logical choice to make. If you're gonna take the storytelling away from Dandelion, which again I don't really see why you must, but if you're gonna do that, giving it to Bluebell made sense, as he is the only other one who does tell an El Herrera story. In the beginning, he's the one who tells the story of the trial of El Herrera. So, okay, like secondary storyteller promoted to primary storyteller, I guess we can live with that. But I still don't understand why Dandelion got relegated to romantic comic relief ultimately, even after the whole, heroic crow scene, right? He just becomes the non-talkative, romantic fool.
He's a device. It's just a device. It's just
Yeah.
Well, and it's one of those things that I suspect that was inspired by the TV show. Apparently, the Dandelion and Hawkbit kind of comedy team is a thing in the TV series. I don't think Dandelion he's certainly not silent in that version, but they have a little, like, somebody in the chat said they have a Merry and Pippin thing going on. Like, not exactly,
Right.
but that's what they're going for, is kind of the kind of comedy side characters. So
Right.
I guess that's sort of, but yeah, like, what does it serve? Certainly not me.
Yeah, it's hard. Oh, by the way, I have to go back. Lilith in the Twitch chat made an excellent point. She was correcting me on my rash and frustrated claim that there are no tricks in the miniseries. She's pointing out there are tricks in the miniseries. Two that she referred to. One was a very excellent point, which is the trick that Heisenplay plays on the Ephraphans, right? When she gives the false information to the doe that she knows is their spy, so that they, that there's going to be a breakout west of Ephrafa, and so they run over to the wrong place, right? That's a legitimate trick. I will definitely concede that. So yeah, that's a fine. It's a little bit lame, I'll have to say. I mean, it's cunning of her to do that, right? And collected, especially since she does it like literally on the rabbit scaffold, right? I mean, it's like her last request before she's executed. So, like, to have the presence of mind to execute a piece of misdirection on your enemy, like when you're about to get executed, like, that's pretty cool. Like, okay, I can respect that. It's not exactly, an El Herrera caliber trick, but anyway, it's in the category. The other one, Lilith, I agree with you that it's a trick, but I actually would complain about it. And that is how the I would complain about it because actually, Kat, this is perhaps, I think it sounds like my visceral reaction to this is close to your Dandelion reactions, actually, and that is like the bigwig standing up to General Woundwort, in the final battle at the end, was one of my, from childhood, one of the most inspiring. Like, if I needed to be inspired and pumped up, I would go back and reread that scene. The bigwig standing and Woundwort becoming afraid, right? Oh man, it is so powerful. And the central line that he delivers, right? when Woundwort is asking him, why would you throw your life away like this? And he says, because my chief rabbit told me to guard this run. And Woundwort's response to his chief rabbit, Vervain says behind him, right? Oh man, it is so amazing. Both like seeing at the same time the loyalty of Bigwig, right? But at the same time, like the misunderstanding by Woundwort, the way that it shows the shallowness of the Ephraphins, the assumption that they make, right? And the way that like that assumption itself points to like what is the heart of the difference between Ephrafa and Watership Down, right? That like they assume that the chief rabbit must be the biggest and strongest, and so anyway, it's such a wonderful moment. And yeah, in the miniseries, it's just turned into a ruse, right? Tell him you're guarding for the chief rabbit, right? And I mean, like, so it has in the end, I like a shadow of the effect of that latter effect that I was describing, but it's really it's made into a again a ruse, like just a little cheap trick rather. But I do agree. It is a trick as well. Like they are deliberately doing an act of deception. So there are, and maybe Lilith is right. There are two tricks.
Again, it's that lack of, they're compensating for something. It's a lack of subtlety because they give it away by the fact that Hazel says, I have one last trick for you. Tell him that your chief, which, so like on the one hand, you would say like, well, look, they're emphasizing the point that it's a trick, but by the fact that they're saying it before it happens, you're kind of letting the air out of the balloon a little bit. You're giving away the fact that, whereas I think when Bigwig says it, he's not necessarily saying it to trick them. He's saying it as like, I'm telling my truth. And but the trick is that it's misinterpreted, and you don't realize that until the moment that it's said. It's not like a plan that anybody sort of devised ahead of time to cleverly trick the Ephraphins. So again, we have it, but it's kind of turned around the wrong way.
I agree that it's a bad piece of script writing in exactly the way that you were describing. It's also almost nonsensical. Hazel is Bigwig's chief rabbit, and he is, in fact, telling him to guard that run. So for Hazel to say, tell him as a trick, tell him your chief rabbit told you to guard that run. It's like, wait, you just did, and you are his chief rabbit. It's like, it just doesn't hold together. It doesn't make sense. And I don't know, it just does not seem like they have a good sense of their own again, like we're losing stuff from the story, and I don't see what we're gaining.
It takes away from Bigwig as well. He just seems more like a puppet than.
Yes.
Maybe we should. Well, go ahead.
Yes. No. Emily, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna shift us because I do think that there were again back with your philosophy of what is the film doing? You know, what's here to work with?
Yes.
I mean, I found a lot of the gender switching refreshing, and I found the role of the does in Ephrafa pretty well handled in many ways in terms of just increasing the agency of female characters in the story and making it less, because I mean I agree that the whole story premise of, well, we got to get some does, you know, or we're going to be extinct, like this is the only function of women, you know, I mean that's a little bit of an issue in the story, although I don't think that the story really, that's not the end, you know, that's not the only role obviously that the does play. But I mean I think this film does some really interesting things to appeal to all, you know, all audiences, and to kind of sidestep some of those stickier, a little bit more old-fashioned notions that come through in a story that's about rabbits who want to survive. So I don't know, maybe I'll just throw that out there and see if anybody wants to bite on you know, Heisenflay and Strawberry. I thought Strawberry was a compelling character, the way that they drew her, and of course really well voiced.
Olivia Colman.
Yeah, she's great. So
can we go to slide 9, Curtis?
Which one is that? I don't
This
have to
one.
know. Okay.
That
This one.
Yeah, let's talk about the does.
Yeah, Clover. Clover was good too. I enjoyed her.
I agree. Like I thought I mean, Heisenflay and you know, was portrayed, I thought, pretty well. I kind of like the raggedness of her and the does, the whole look of that kind of scrawny, scraggly thing. I think it's pretty
Yep.
effective. I thought Clover was expanded in kind of interesting ways, and I agree that the strawberry kind of gender flop worked pretty well. I wish that, or I don't necessarily, I wonder why, if we're going to increase, you know, the roles of the female characters and have some new ones, why every one of them has to have a romantic subplot, because they don't in the book. So it's not that I object to there being an element of romance. It just seems like we're going out of our way to increase the role of female characters, and then also making sure they all have a pair at the end, which is slightly counterproductive. But so I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. Like Heisenflay in the novel, I don't think. When I was looking this up, apparently it does specify in Tales from Watership Down, but in Watership Down, the book, it doesn't specify who she ends up mating with.
No.
Like, is it Hazel? Is it Bigwig? Is it Holly? Like, she has connections with all of them, and it's not until Tales from Watership Down that you get any confirmation of who her mate is. So the fact that, like, not only do we have more female characters, but all of them end up kind of neatly sort of paired off at the end, I found slightly grating. But overall, I thought that they did a good job of finding places for women and women actors in these stories.
I'm still trying to decide how I felt about some of these scenes of violence against women. I mean, I'll say first off that my son and I, you know, having not too long ago finished reading the book aloud, you know, when I saw that the series was coming out, I was like, you know, we were both really excited to watch it. He got maybe 2 scenes in and was like, I'm out. This is terrifying. I can't watch this. So he, you know, he's 7 years old at the time. So, you know, that's the first thing. But then when I got to those scenes on my own, I was like, like, first of all, the marking, which is just,
oh my goodness,
completely creepy. What is wrong with that rabbit?
Yes.
And how did they get that? Why is it a theropod? Like, what is going on with its back toe? How do you cultivate that kind of a toenail?
Yeah.
Anyway, and then with the scene with Clover,
reach against the floor.
It's awful. It's just awful. But the scene with Clover and Woundwort was just like wrong. Like
that had some seriously creepy, like, rapey vibes.
Yeah.
The marking had really creepy rapey vibes.
Yes.
You know, I mean, absolutely. The way that they were, I mean, even though it was like male rabbits who were in line to be marked there, it, like, the whole atmosphere of that was like, oh, it's my turn next, and, like, you know, just try to endure it. I mean, it was horrible. I was
because he like smelled her and stuff when she it was really horrifying. Really horrifying. Yeah.
Yes. Horrifying. That was horrifying. So I ask myself, in my continuing quest to try to figure out what the miniseries is trying to do, why are we being horrified in exactly those ways? Well, this is kind of shifting. I don't want to shift away from the women topic, because I want to talk about that more. But it is a little bookmark for a topic I want to get to, is like, what's the point of Ephrafa? Like, what's the Ephrafa story here? Why is Ephrafa, what makes Ephrafa horrible, and how does that relate to the main story? Like, how does that advance our plot? But as I say, I don't want to leave the women behind entirely. I found, on the one hand, you have to say, you know, you have to admit that Heisenflay and Clover are both fairly strong independent characters. Like, it's not like they're just about their men folk or something like that. However, it's also more than just pairing off at the end, right? It's like a context all the way, especially with Clover, right? The whole like love at first sight thing that happened with Hazel and Clover, which is to me the most extreme example of the anthropomorphism of the like of the insufficient animality, right, of the rabbits. How weird that was. But I think it did. I mean, in the end, it did way more violence to Hazel's character than to Clover's, in my opinion. But still, like, that was her context from the very beginning, was that she was like the love interest, and then she went on to play this other and kind of interesting role in Ephrafa. Though I have to admit, the whole like Woundwort like offering to make her his queen, I'm like, I'm really straining my disbelief right here. Like, where on earth, why should we believe this? What on earth is Woundwort doing, being like, oh yeah, I'm a hutch rabbit, you're a hutch rabbit. You should come and be my queen.
like, why doesn't he already have a queen? You know,
I don't know.
His next spring rabbit.
What does it even mean to be the queen? Like,
Yeah,
any of it.
why a queen anyway? Like,
Yes.
Yeah. He doesn't seem like a power sharing sort of guy.
No,
right, exactly. Like,
he speaks as if he's offering her power, right? Like, it means something to be his queen, and and then he pushes her down the hole, right?
Well, think about it. Slam.
Yeah.
Again,
and
think of
given
all over that.
And given the strong rapey vibes, like, why does he need to talk her into it in the first place?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, there's a sense of like,
Right.
there's a negotiation happening here, and why?
Yeah,
Right,
she is given power, not just shared power by him, but like she's given a choice. I mean, he proposes to her as if she has a choice about responding. And now again, her actual power might be, but she's allowed to go and think about it, right?
Right.
Which means she has some kind of agency,
She could say
potentially, or at
no,
least
I guess.
in theory, right? Maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. But again, like, in which case, so, I mean, apart from the fact that I just had a really hard time getting over the concept of Woundwort as like suitor, right? Woundwort proposing to somebody was like a little more than I could handle. but apart from that, it was just, I felt like the whole story, as so often with this miniseries, was just like really uneven. Like, most of the time in Ephrafa, I was just getting like, okay, like, hardcore totalitarian state. That's where we are. Hardcore totalitarian state, right? And yet Clover's like manipulation of the system seemed not really to fit that exactly. Woundwort seemed to actually want something from her. She seemed to have something to offer him, which he recognized in some way. And I'm like, what exactly? I don't know. It was, I didn't get it. I didn't really understand it. But again, she was left being a fairly independent and interesting character. Though again, also talk about straining my understanding of the whole, like, absolutely no attempt or interest in maintaining it. She's a hutch rabbit. She's never been outside a box in her life, and now she's like the rabbit of the world who has like all the cunning plans, and she's the only one who can maintain a level head in this like incredibly hostile environment. And I'm like, okay.
She's never even heard of El Ra.
Right, exactly. Exactly. So again, I found, and that was just, it was something that, again, I get they're not trying to bring us into the rabbit world, but that's, for that reason, that was my biggest hesitation with Clover all the way through. I liked Hazel, or I liked Clover as a character, if I could forget the fact that like she just, kind of emerges ex nihilo, right? And her character is totally inconsistent in that way. Like, I am going from someone who has literally never even eaten grass in my life to like I am the most knowing rabbit in the whole group. Like, I don't understand. I can't. They failed to take me along on that particular ride with this character.
Well, and some of that too, which it's tough to complain about this kind of thing when it's expanding to like a 4-hour miniseries, whereas the film was only like an hour and a half. So that was
Yeah.
really compressed. But even
Yes.
here, the timeline still feels awfully compressed. That like they arrive at Watership Down and they're not there a day before they're all split up, right? Like
Yes.
Hazel goes off and he gets injured, and Holly's like, he just got there and he's off, like, I'm off to Ephrathah, and the others are with him. And then Clover's wandering and gets caught by a wide patrol, which apparently makes it all the way to the foot of
To
the down.
Nothinger Farm, yeah.
So apparently
That was my
Ephrathah's
biggest
like
problem.
a stone's throw away. And it was just like this sense of like, couldn't we at least like have a sense of a couple weeks have passed? Like, or something to maybe then I could kind of buy that Clover has had a little bit of time to acquaint herself with what grass tastes like and what like some experience of the world before she's caught and taken to Ephrathah.
Yeah. No, that element of the plot was one of the things that I found enduringly strange. The whole, it's one thing, I mean, I don't know, I guess maybe it makes sense to, maybe they're trying to make the plot more fluid. They don't want it to be so episodic, because there are very clear, you know, like now we're doing the Warren of the Snares thing, and this is the end of the Warren and the Snares sequence, and now we're starting this new sequence on establishing Watership Down, and now we're going to Ephrathah, and now that's done, and now we have the, you know, the 4 parts, you know, the 4 books of Watership Down are very discrete in that way. And I mean, I guess I can understand how maybe you want to make a more fluid storyline in the film. That seems to me a defensible choice, but I felt like the entire thing was just like rocketing out of control. All of the rabbits, like the different groups of rabbits, are going off. No one knows what's happening until we have Hawkbit and Dandelion and Strawberry left by themselves. They don't even know where anyone else is.
Where the heck is everybody?
Right? They're just like, oh, where is everybody? We don't know. Why has everyone gone away? No clue. Let's dig a warren or something in case people come back someday. Like, okay. And Hazel like is not even in communication with other people. Like, not only does he not like have a cunning plan to go to Ephrathah, it's just like he doesn't even, it's the whole thing just seems so disjointed and confusing, totally unnecessarily confusing. And it was another one of those things where it's just like I didn't see a plot line, like a storyline, really get a chance to develop. I don't know. That was definitely another thing that I had a hard time with there.
Convoluted.
Yes.
Convoluted.
Can we go back one slide and maybe talk about some more Ephrathah stuff?
Yes.
And other thoughts about. I tried to get a screenshot. This was the best one I could get of the tower that they live in, because this is another moment of inappropriate lack of animality. Because do we all, I mean, maybe we all agree that we're trying to evoke a kind of Barad-dûr Dark Tower vibe here, but it seems to me that Woundwart's whole thing is fear of humans, and
the book,
like the most concealed warren ever. Why are they living out in the open in a bunch of human ruins?
Yeah.
Just wondering.
Why are we choosing to live in like this dusty, sandy, unpleasant, you know, stone ruin? I mean, just because it's stark and cool? Like, you know, are they like goth rabbits or something that they just think it's awesome to live in a ruin, you know? And I didn't.
Well, and look at how exposed they are. Like, look at Peter. You can see every single rabbit that's in that warren.
Yes.
Any enemy that comes by is going to see them in an instant. Like, again, there's just a lack of insight into why Woundwort does what he does. It's not just that Woundwort is scary and totalitarian. He actually does have a purpose.
Yes.
And this kind of is sort of the opposite of what he seems to want to achieve in the novel.
Yeah, in his own way, Woundwort is a very effective leader. You know, not just a powerful leader, but he is in his own way a really effective leader. And yeah, I mean, again, it's not that they need to do exactly the same thing as the book, right? I mean, the book, Ephrafa in the book is, I mean, it's actually an almost eerily applicable theme, right? I mean, it's sort of an enduring theme, right? I mean, the whole Ephrafa situation is essentially barter freedom for safety, right? You know, if you are willing to give up all of your rights and you know, all of of like anything that makes life enjoyable, we will give you safety in exchange, right? That's the Ephrafa offer, basically, which is of course enforced, so you can't choose but to accede to it. However, that's like what is being dramatized. They're like, Ephrafa makes sense. The whole rationale of Ephrafa makes sense, right? That like you're like, hey, you know, rabbits have never been so safe before. Like there's like the mortality among the rabbits. Like no rabbit is ever killed. No rabbit's ever killed by evil. No rabbits are ever discovered by men, right? It's you couldn't be possibly safer than living in Ephrafa, except for like from the council, right? You know, the bosses might kill you, but if they don't kill you, nothing else will. Right. Super safe, super horrible. I didn't, so again, it's not that they have to do that same story, though again, one could certainly say that message is certainly, like that theme is certainly a theme super applicable today too. Lots of opportunity to do stuff like that, you know, to do stuff with that in a modern miniseries, but that's okay, they don't have to. But what do they do instead? It seemed almost like the kind of thing that we've often complained about in film that we've been trying to, you know, one of the things that we talk about when we do our film adaptations is talk about like the process of fall, right? Like we don't want to have anybody who's like, I am just a villain for the sake of being a villain. Like I am evil because I arbitrarily like evil and enjoy that kind of thing. You know, like we want to like understand like what is it that leads somebody down that path. And really kind of exploring those themes with Ephrafa. I can in the book you can see it, right? You can see you can see Woundwort's personal process. You can see how all the rabbits go along with it and why, and how it evolves into the place where it is socially. I didn't get Ephrafa at all in the series. It's like stark, it's ugly, it's scary. It's just a place where bullies are on top and people who are, you know, like rabbits who are strong and forceful assert their will over other people, and that people like Orcus, again, why we had to invent a brand new dude when there were so many perfectly available Ausla officers from the book that we didn't use. I don't know why we needed a different one, especially since Orcus does not strike me. I guess just because it sounds like orc. Is that it? Yeah. Is that why we chose that name?
I spent most of the series, as soon as he was on screen, I was like, who? Like, I'm, you know, and it's a difficult word translating from British to American English. And I'm like, hawk something? Or who is this guy? Who is this guy? Yeah, I didn't get it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I stopped and looked at the cast list on IMDb at that point because I was like, wait, what? Who
that would be the smart thing to do. I just was like, I'm confused. More wine.
Yeah. I could tell him apart because he looked like I'm like, oh yeah, the one who looks like a hyena, right? Okay, right, like the hyena bunny. Got it. Like it's him, but what his name was, right? I didn't get. But
that's funny because I had a harder time telling the Ephrafa apart. I thought I had them pegged. And then the one I thought was Vervain got called something else. So then I'm like, I thought I had my Ephrafa straight, and apparently I didn't.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, and the thing about Ephrafa, I mean, just a second, everything Corey is saying, but also I couldn't understand why in this, what is the inducement to stay, you know, for these people? why, I mean, they're not, they can't just be held there against their will. There's too many of them, you know? So what in this manifestation of Everfa, why does anybody stick around, you know? And that got particularly wound out, you know, in the book. It begins to fall apart, you know, when Woundwort is just over pursuing these Watership Down rabbits, and his band does fall apart because of that.
And they start to question,
but it started falling apart way too early, and it's the narrative didn't hold kind of logically. It's like, why is this guy really doing this?
There's definitely a sense of, like, I mean, I agree. Like, why are you so concerned with people leaving, or rabbits who act like people leaving, you know, all the time? But especially like going back to the setting of the place, like, maybe don't live somewhere that's so open. Like, maybe you should be in a warren where you only have like an exit or two, you know, to guard, and not like just a little wall that you can jump over or something.
Do you know how many Ausla they would need to prevent breakouts on just an open plain like that, with everybody out in the open all the time? Everybody, I mean, it's I agree, Emily. It seemed nonsensical, and Curtis, I agree. It's so hard to understand the whole picture, because you know, and perhaps that's actually. See, I guess this is even a harsher criticism than I was at first making. I was at first saying they weren't really trying to get us to enter into the world of rabbits, which is certainly true. But the more I think about it, the more I feel like they're not really trying to get us into a world at all. Like, there is not a consistent world, a consistently conceived world that it's not just that it's a different one. It's just not even really, because Everfa just doesn't make sense, you know, in exactly the ways that you're describing it. That is sad.
So
we're trying to like it.
I tried so hard.
Like it.
Tried so hard.
I was just gonna take advantage of the lull there to say that we have about 10 more minutes. Do we want to try to find something nice to say? We don't have to.
We said nice things about Clover.
It might be worth mentioning this is our last chance to do so.
Let's see.
It was beautiful. It was a beautiful series to watch in many ways. I thought that there were, oh no, I thought that would be non-controversial. I thought that there were a lot of really beautiful shots. And I thought that there were times when the light was really beautiful.
I think I have to agree with James Ponowazek's New York Times review, who said the details, the bristles of fur, the ripples of water are remarkable until something moves. And like, from a still image, like looking up all the still images to find images for the slideshow, gorgeous.
Yeah.
In practice, looked like a poorly rendered video game to me. The movement of, maybe the natural world not so much, but the movement of the animals felt not very attractive. Especially, like, even worse than the rabbits, I have to say, like the dog and the cat, like,
oh, they were terrible.
Not good. Really not good.
I almost thought that it might be intentional, that they were being intentionally
like cartoonish,
animated to look very demonic, like the enemies that they are. But that dog was particularly bad.
Yes.
Yeah, the cat and the fox too, all bad.
Yes. Yeah. Hey, wait! I thought of a good thing.
I half agree in the terms of, like, from the still images of the kind of natural setting and everything.
Yeah,
I agree that those were well done.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I'll stand by. I just think it was extremely creepy to see those rabbits talking. That was just something really super. And what you might be saying about the animation, that could play into what I'm talking about.
Here's my good thing. It made me really like the 1978 film much more than I did before.
I gotta watch it.
I was watching. I'm like, okay, I used to complain about this, but it's not so bad actually. I really like this. And part of me is actually now wondering if the primary flaws I saw in the 1978 film are due mostly just to its length. It is an hour and 25 minutes long, an hour and 25, and they did the whole thing. They didn't cut out any major plot sequence in the entire story. It's amazing. And so, Kat, as you were saying about it earlier on, it does feel like, you know, the whole, like, there's no time to linger on the significance of any particular moment, you know, in the story. It's absolutely true. But I was amazed. I mean, I was actually watching the timestamp all the way through, and I'm like, they're never going to have time. They're not going to do that too. They can't possibly squeeze that in. And I'm like, wow, we did that whole thing in 3 minutes. I can't believe that. They did Cowslip's Warren in like 5 minutes, the whole thing. And they cut out surprisingly little. Like we got it was incredible. I mean, I'm like super impressed at what they managed to fit into an hour and 25 minutes, even though they, you know, kind of missed a lot of things as a consequence, but still it was incredible. Anyway, so yeah, so I enjoy it. Made me enjoy the 1978 film like I've never enjoyed it before. So there's that.
I don't know if that's a good thing
about the show. I'm sorry, Curtis.
Oh,
sorry. No, I was just gonna say, like, I don't know if that qualifies as a good thing about the show.
Oh, that doesn't count.
But it's a positive result, I suppose, of the miniseries, even if it's not directly about it.
And I don't know. Maybe I need to watch the movie again because I'm struggling with, I can't decide which I find more frustrating. Like, do I want the whole thing done, but you know, crazy fast and without any moment to breathe or any sense of why anything mattered? Or do I want a thing that takes its time a little bit more, seems to try to find moments for emotion and character and drama, but completely misunderstands the point of those dramatic moments? And I don't know, like, I'm struggling, and I'm struggling with, like, which do I like better? Like, if I can try to remove myself from the book, which works better? Like, if I just came to it not knowing anything about the book and didn't think that deeply about the logic of the story, maybe this miniseries would hold together more, because it does have some more dramatic beats. It has some more character elements. Like, it takes its time a little bit more. I think it's just that when you kind of start to think about it, the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I prefer the film, but I definitely, I think, makes you want to go back and revisit and reconsider if some of its flaws might actually be there for a reason. Like, maybe it was just overambitious in the amount of stuff it thought it could do in an hour and 25 minutes.
Well, so since I can't think of any other positive things to say in our last 5 minutes, I'll just say another like my biggest problem with the entire mini, which I haven't even talked about yet, which is Hazel. In the miniseries, what on earth is the point of Hazel's story? Like, what is even Hazel's story? What is his story about? Like, it looked at first like the point of Hazel's story was going to be about, you know, something like what it is in the book about leadership, learning to, like, what it means to be a leader and everything. At the beginning, with the way that they were playing the tension with Bigwig following the 78 film, it sounded like that's what we were building up towards. And then he sees Clover from a distance, and from that moment on, Hazel is a completely brainless character for the entire rest of the miniseries, when he is absolutely abdicating any possible leadership role and instead just being like, I don't care what risks I have to run, I'm going to get Clover back. And like, meanwhile, she's doing perfectly fine on her own, way better than he's doing, right? And she's the one who manages to actually accomplish things. So he's he's thrown everything out the window, right, in order to rescue her, who doesn't end up actually needing rescuing at all in the end. And so like he doesn't even accomplish the one thing that he sets out to do, and then they're reunited, and it feels, I don't know about you, but to me, by the time Hazel and Clover got together again at the end, I was like he doesn't deserve her. Like Clover is slumming with this idiot, at the end of the story. I'm like, come on, Clover could do way better than him, because what does he bring to the table? Like nothing. He does nothing. And of course, this is like, it's hard because Hazel is one of my favorite literary characters of all time. And in fact, I decided after watching the miniseries and then reading the book again this past week, I decided I'm going to write a book about Hazel in Watership Down. Like to vindicate Hazel from like the horrible thing they did to him, which was like what they did to Hazel in this miniseries is, in my opinion, 10 times worse than what they did to Faramir in the Peter Jackson film. Like it's that bad. And because I think he's taken down from an even higher place. Like I would put Hazel above Faramir. Like I would follow Hazel before I would follow Faramir. And yet like he got taken down to an even. I mean, at least movie Faramir like redeemed himself at the end.
Well, and that's the thing, because I have a couple of responses, but one of them being like, I know this is heresy to a lot of people, but the Faramir thing, I can see why they did it. I'm not saying it worked. I'm not saying that we have to agree with it. But he arrived at a place where, okay, by the end of the Two Towers film, you kind of can see what was the point of the little deviation we took from the road. Whereas I think Hazel here is consistent with what we've been saying about it's different, but why? Like, what are we getting instead of what we had? And then your little circles. Your little rant there reminded me of the moment that really offended me when he's known Clover for all of 30 seconds? Like they met outside the hutch, and that's it. Yeah. And then he's wounded, and then she goes looking for him, and then she gets captured, and that's it. That's the only interaction they've had. When he's not wanting to leave, when Fiver and for some reason is trying to talk him out of waiting for Bigwig and the Does, his whole thing is, I can't leave Clover. And I thought, what about Bigwig, who's been with you?
Yeah, right.
Leave Bigwig to Woundwort. He's only been with you this entire journey, got you out of how many different
he becomes completely obsessed.
But those subtle characterizations of the friendship, the importance of the friendship, and the fact that Bigwig and Hazel are really parallel leaders, and Fiver too. I mean, those three are a triptych, but the subtlety of that just gets lost in this film, because we got to make everything on some level about sex, or people won't be interested in it, and it's sorry, but Arthur Harrow also pointed out brilliantly that they even stole their little love line straight from Star Wars anyway. So I love you, I know, basically it's like the same kind of used sentiment. It's like, okay, yeah, I mean, I agree. It just the rabbit romance was like really cute, in many ways, but it took over much more important elements of the plot and of the story in general, the spirit of the story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I am a little concerned that we haven't even talked about Kihar.
Sure.
And I want to say right now that Peter Capaldi, I do love Peter Capaldi. I got used to him as Kihar, and I enjoyed him as Kihar, but I couldn't stop thinking of Corey's Kihar and from the Mythgard Academy class, and missing that voice of Kihar, which to me was much more authentic to what
he should sound at least a little bit like a seagull, right?
Like a Scandinavian seagull too. I wanted him to be more,
Right. No, they don't. They cast Peter Capaldi for his kind of grumpy Scottishness rather than trying to go for the whole Norwegian thing.
And I could definitely believe it if I hadn't read the book. I could definitely believe it. And of course they gave him the brilliant bye-bye bunnies line or whatever. I'm just glad bunnies made it into the series. That's just great.
Yeah.
Because somebody called them bunnies.
I was annoyed by Capaldi's Cahar the first time. I enjoyed it much more the second time. Once again, I found myself saying, what is the character arc of Cahar? Like,
once you realize it's not going anywhere, you can just enjoy it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that was it. Like, once it was just like, okay, I mean, he had some funny lines, and some of his comedy was sort of was effective. If like once I got over, I mean, so of course because the first time watching it, I was looking to see like the growth of the relationship between Cahar and Bigwig especially, which whatever, that never came to pass, but okay, at least with like the rabbits as a whole. But the way that even to the very end, it was like, you know, like, be back here at sunset, maybe, right? You know, and he's like, you know, I'm like, okay, that was funny, but like, that's not the time for jokes, right? I just, it seemed like comic relief. There was a way in which like Capaldi's Cahar just seemed completely detached from the entire story. Like I'm gonna sit here, like Cahar's gonna sit here and make fun of everything that's happening because it's all just kind of ridiculous. You know?
And that's where, you know, this insufficient animality comes in, because what bonds the Cahar and the rabbits is Cahar understands that they need the mothers, or they're gonna, because he needs mothers too, you know, and he gets that on an animal level, and that's how Hazel can reach out to these other species, because they share this common animality, and with that flippant attitude of Cahar, that was just gone. It was just like, oh well, we need to keep the audience in suspense, you know, that this guy might not actually come through.
Right.
Is he going to show or is he not going to show?
Whether or not he's actually going to come back.
Right.
And by the way, sense of his character development.
Right. And by the way, that too is directly lifted from the 1978 film and has nothing to do with the book. In the 1978 film, they didn't have the uncertainty of whether or not, like, that is, he didn't say maybe I'll come back and maybe I won't. But in the climactic scene beneath the arch, Cahar is up on the tracks on top, and the rabbits are underneath, and he doesn't see them. And so for a while, it's like, so he's looking over one side and he doesn't see them. He walks over and Bigwig goes to the other side and he looks over that side and he doesn't see them. So like the 78 film allows us to suspect that there's going to be a miscommunication in the storm, so that when he comes in, it's a surprise, semi-surprise to the audience as well as to Woundwort, obviously. So that whole sequence, again, very strongly visually reminiscent of the 78 film, but it's just another place where they seem to be working more off of the old film than they were thinking about either the book or about really their own story, it seemed.
Yeah, I did add a slide in called "The Seagulls Are Coming" at Curtis's request. And then we touched on some of these, thinking of these moments of kind of eucatastrophe. I couldn't find a good screenshot of the dog chase, so I threw in my favorite piece of fan art, which nice. I love that image more than any other adaptation. I'll take that one image over the miniseries any day. Anyway. Yeah. So any other Cahar or eucatastrophe thoughts that we didn't already touch on?
Well, I'll just read what Arthur Harrow wrote about Cahar, which he says, Cahar could have been worse. And so maybe that's a good sentiment to end on for the entire series. It could have been worse.
It could have been worse.
Could have been worse.
As much as we complain, there's definitely things that could have been done that were worse. So on that note, the good news is that when we return on October 10th, we'll be talking about a movie that we all like. Well, I mean, it won't be this group per se, but Kat and I at least will be returning for a movie that we enjoy, and we'll have maybe some more positive things to talk about. So thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. We'll be back in October with Pan's Labyrinth, and we hope to see you then.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.